The morning Sylvia Holt stepped out of her silver Mercedes onto the cracked asphalt of Beaumont, Texas. She looked at the building in front of her the way a person looks at something they cannot believe actually exists. It was a small electrical repair shop wedged between a laundromat and a tire place on the corner of Calder Avenue. The sign above the door, hand-painted, faded to the color of old mustard, read Decker Electric, Est, 1987. One of the letters had come loose and been reattached with what appeared to be electrical tape. The front window had a crack running diagonal from corner to corner, patched with a strip of clear packing tape that had gone yellow with age. There were 2 plastic chairs on the concrete stoop outside, the kind that come in a bag from a doll store, and sitting in one of them was a small girl, maybe 7 years old, with braids and paint-stained overalls, drawing something in a spiral notebook with intense concentration. Sylvia was 44 years old, the regional director of operations for Crestline Development Group, and she had driven 40 minutes from her hotel in Houston, in a car that now had what sounded like an electrical fault in the climate control system. The air had started blowing hot somewhere on I-10, and by the time she reached Beaumont, the dashboard display was throwing a warning code she didn't recognize. Her assistant had called 3 shops. 2 were booked through the week. One had recommended Decker Electric, specifically for European vehicle systems. She had said, "Are you sure?" Her assistant had said, "That's what they told me, Miss Holt." She stood now on that sidewalk in a white linen blazer and heels she should not have worn on pavement like this, looking at the cracked window and the dollar store chairs and the small girl with the notebook, and she took a slow breath through her nose. The girl looked up. "Hi," the girl said. "Hello," Sylvia said. She looked past the girl toward the open door of the shop. "Is there someone who works here?" "My dad," the girl said, and went back to her drawing. Inside, the shop was different from what the exterior had promised. Not nicer exactly, but different. The walls were lined with metal shelving holding components organized into labeled bins. The kind of labeling system that takes years and a particular kind of mind. There were 2 vehicles in the bays, one a late-model Audi with its instrument panel removed, the other something older under a tarp. Every tool on the pegboard above the main workbench had an outline traced behind it in black marker, so you could see at a glance what was missing and where it belonged. A man was crouching beside the Audi, running a diagnostic scanner along the underside of the center console. He was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with grease on his forearms and a streak of it across his left cheek that he hadn't noticed. His name was Patrick Holloway. No, wait, his name was Avery Cross. He had a face that was neither remarkable nor forgettable. The kind of face that people describe afterward as calm, as though calmness is a feature rather than an impression. He wore a gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and steel-toed boots that had seen better decades. He heard someone come in and didn't look up immediately, because he was in the middle of reading a number and he didn't want to lose it. "1 second," he said. Sylvia Holt stopped 2 steps inside the doorway. She looked at the shelving, at the Audi, at the man crouching. She looked at the floor, concrete, swept clean, with a drain in the center and an old rubber mat near the workbench. She looked at the tarp-covered vehicle in the second bay. "Take your time," she said, in a voice that suggested she would not, in fact, be taking her time. Avery stood, rolled his neck, tucked the scanner into his back pocket, and turned around. He was a man who, when he turned around, gave you his full attention. Not the polite fraction that most people offer, while still processing whatever they were just doing. His full attention, which had a quality of stillness to it that some people found reassuring, and others found slightly unnerving. He looked at Sylvia Holt. The blazer, the heels on cracked concrete, the tight set of her shoulders, and understood the situation without needing her to explain it. "Vehicle problem?" he said. "Climate control," she said. "And a dashboard warning I can't identify?" "The car's a 2022 Mercedes GLE 580. It started on the highway about 40 minutes ago." Avery nodded once. "Pull it in," he said, and pointed to the empty space beside the tarp-covered vehicle. Sylvia paused. She looked at the empty bay. She looked at the tarp-covered vehicle. She looked back at Avery. "What?" It's under the tarp, she said. It was the way she asked it. Not curious, but evaluating, the way someone checks the hygiene rating posted in a restaurant window before deciding to stay. Project car, Avery said. Yours? Clients, he said. I restore them, among other things. She nodded slowly, with an expression that meant I see without meaning I'm impressed, and she went back outside to pull the Mercedes in. He had been 8 years old when his father first put a voltmeter in his hand and told him that electricity didn't lie. It either flows or it doesn't. You don't argue with it. You learn to listen to it. His father, Gordon Cross, had run Decker Electric, named for the block it sat on, Decker Lane, before the city renamed it. For 31 years before a stroke took him. Avery had been 27. He'd come back from Austin, where he'd been working in building systems engineering for a commercial contractor. And he'd taken over the shop because there was no one else, and because he didn't know what else to do with his grief. He had not planned to stay. He was still there 14 years later. His daughter, Margot, 6 years old, almost 7, with her mother's stubbornness and his father's curiosity, had started sitting on the stoop with her notebook after school, because her grandmother, who usually watched her until 5, had a physical therapy appointment on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He'd set her up with a juice box and a snack, and told her to stay on the stoop and not go in the road. She had said, "Dad, I know how roads work," in a voice so flat and exhausted by the obviousness of this that he'd had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. He thought about Margot now, briefly, as he ran the diagnostic on the Mercedes. She'd been drawing something serious when he'd glanced out at her. She drew everything seriously. Animals, mostly, each one labeled with its name and what it ate and how it slept. Last week she'd drawn 17 different types of beetles and corrected him when he'd called one a bug. "It's a beetle, Dad. That's a specific thing." The Mercedes diagnostic pulled up a code he recognized, a fault in the HVAC blower motor controller. Not complicated. Not cheap, because it never was with these vehicles, but not complicated. He ran the SEC scan to rule out the blend door actuator and the refrigerant pressure sensor. "Is it bad?" Sylvia Holt said from behind him. She had positioned herself at a distance that suggested she was trying not to look too interested, while clearly being too interested. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't looking at it. She was watching him work. "Blower motor controller," he said. "I need to confirm with a secondary test, but that's what I'm seeing." "How long?" 2 hours. Maybe 2.5 if I have to order the component. There was a pause. "This looks like a small operation," she said. "Do you actually have components for a 2022 GLE 580 on hand?" Avery looked up at her. Not with irritation. Just looked. "I have access to the same supplier networks as any shop in the state," he said. "Same-day delivery if I order before noon. It's 10:52. She glanced at her phone. He was right, it was 10:52. She made a small sound that was not quite an apology but was adjacent to one. "I have a call at 1, she said. "Then you'll make your call," he said, and turned back to the vehicle. There was a coffee maker on the shelf near the door. A regular drip machine, nothing special, with a handwritten note taped above it that said, "Help yourself." Sylvia Holt poured herself a cup because she had been standing for 20 minutes, and her heels were beginning to protest, and there was a folding chair near the workbench that she unfolded and sat in, keeping her blazer on, keeping her posture precise, because a person does not become regional director of operations by letting their standards slip. She answered emails. She took a call with her contractor in Dallas. She watched, in her peripheral vision, the man work. He worked quietly. That was the first thing she noticed, not silently, because there was the sound of tools and the scanner, and the occasional soft metallic click of something being opened or replaced. But quietly, without narration, without the commentary that some mechanics seem to use to fill space. He did not tell her what he was doing. He did not explain things she hadn't asked about. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of someone who had done this not hundreds of times but thousands, for whom the search for each component was not a search at all, but a retrieval. A hand going to exactly the right bin, on exactly the right shelf, without a glance. The diagnostic confirmed the blower motor controller. He ordered the component. He showed her the screen. "It'll be here by 12:30, he said. She looked at the screen, then at him. "You do European vehicles specifically, or is this a general shop?" "Started as industrial electrical," he said. "My father built it for commercial and residential repair. I added automotive about 6 years ago. When I noticed how much the diagnostic side had started overlapping. The systems aren't as different as people think." "You have training for this?" 12 years in building systems engineering before I came back here," he said. "And the last 6 running this shop. So, yes." She looked at him for a moment, at the grease on his forearms, the faded work shirt, the shop that from the outside looked like a punchline, and something moved behind her eyes that was not quite revision but was close to it. "I wouldn't have guessed," she said. "Most people don't," he said, without edge, and went to organize the tools he'd set out. Margot came in at 11:15, carrying her notebook and the juice box, which was empty, but which she was still periodically squeezing out of habit. "Dad," she said, "there's a beetle on the sidewalk that I think might be a ground beetle, but I'm not sure. Can I look at it from closer?" "Stay on the sidewalk," he said. "I know how sidewalks work," she said. She looked at Sylvia Holt. Sylvia Holt looked back at her. "Hi," Margot said. "Hello again," Sylvia said. "Your car is broken," Margot said. "I know," Sylvia said. "My dad fixes things," Margot said with the simple confidence of someone reporting a fact. "He fixed Mrs. Portillo's whole house one time when the power went out in just her house and not anyone else's. She gave him a pie. That was a ground fault issue," Avery said, from across the shop. "She gave you a pie," Margot said as though this were the more important part. Sylvia Holt made a sound that was, unmistakably, a small laugh. It surprised her. She pressed her lips together after it, as if recalling something, and looked back at her phone. Margot went outside to look at the beetle. The part arrived at 12:18. Avery had the replacement installed by 1:40. He ran the full system check, not just the climate control, which was now functioning without the warning code, but the full HVAC sequence, the blower at every speed, the recirculation mode, the sensor read on both front zones. He pulled the car out of the bay and left it running with the AC on while he wrote up the invoice. Sylvia Holt came to stand beside the open driver's door and felt the cold air, and stood there for a moment in a way she didn't realize she was doing, like something released. "That's remarkable," she said. "It feels better than it did before it broke." "You had a filter that needed replacement," he said. "I swapped it while I was in there. No charge for that." She looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "It takes 40 seconds, he said. He handed her the invoice. She looked at it, and looked at it again because the number was lower than she'd expected. She had braced, with European vehicle in a specialty shop, for a number that would make her wince. "Is this right?" she said. "Parts plus labor," he said. "That's the number." She looked up at him. "You could charge more." "I charge what the job is worth," he said. "Not what someone is willing to pay because they're stuck." Something in Sylvia Holt's face shifted. Not dramatically, not the way faces shift in movies, with welling eyes and parted lips. It was smaller than that. A slight softening around the mouth, a recalibration happening somewhere behind the eyes. Quiet and private, the kind of shift that doesn't show, unless you're paying close attention. She pulled out her card. She had made her 1 o'clock call from the folding chair, and it had gone well. And she had been thinking about Crestline's expansion into Southeast Texas and the portfolio of commercial properties they were acquiring along the I-10 corridor. That thinking had been interrupted, more than once, by the man across the shop moving through his work, with that particular quality of attention, and by the girl outside, who had come back in to report that the beetle was definitely a ground beetle. Karabadi, Dad. I looked it up, and had drawn it in her notebook with its antenna measurements labeled. Now Sylvia stood beside her running car in the clean cold air, and watched Avery Cross put his tools back in their outlined places on the pegboard. Each one dropped into its correct position without looking. "How long have you been here?" she said. 14 years, he said. He paused just briefly. "My wife passed when Margot was 2, he said. "So yes, since then." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it in the complete way. not the reflexive way. "Thank you," he said in a voice that received the condolence the way it was given. She watched Margot, through the window, resettled on her stoop chair, drawing again. "She's remarkable," Sylvia said. "She's 7 in October," he said. "She knows the Latin classifications for 46 insect families. She corrects adults constantly, and has no idea it's happening." "You're raising her right," Sylvia said. And then, because she was the kind of woman who, when she said something she meant, said it completely. "My father worked construction his whole life. Everyone in our family was always slightly embarrassed about it. He built things, real things, with his hands, things that are still standing. And people at my schools, my jobs, they would ask what my father did, and I would always pause before I answered. I've never told anyone that before." Avery looked at her. "I don't know why I'm telling you now," she said. "Maybe it needed somewhere to go," he said. She drove back to Houston in a car that ran cold and clean, the climate control even across both zones, the dashboard clear of warnings. She had a 40-minute drive and she didn't turn on the radio. She thought about the outline tools on the pegboard. She thought about "I charge what the job is worth, not what someone is willing to pay because they're stuck." She thought about her father's hands, which had been large and calloused, and which she had been embarrassed of at school events, and which had built the addition on the back of their house in Odessa when she was 11, and which had gone still 8 years ago in a hospital room in Midland, while she held one of them, and thought there was so much she had never said. She did not cry. She was not the kind of woman who cried on the I-10, but something in her chest was sitting differently than it had been. When she drove out this morning shifted. The way a room looks different after you move a single piece of furniture. Back on Calder Avenue, the afternoon had softened into that particular Texas, late afternoon quality, where the light goes golden, and the heat backs off by 3 degrees, but the air is still warm enough to feel like a hand on your shoulder. Avery Cross locked the component bins and swept the second bay, and put the cover back on the tarp car, which was 1969 Pontiac Firebird that a man in Vidor had brought him 6 months ago in pieces, and which was, under Avery's careful attention, becoming something again. Margot was inside now, at the small desk in the corner that had been his father's desk, doing her homework. She had her Beetle drawing open beside her math worksheet, and was occasionally looking from one to the other, as though the Beetle might have opinions about long division. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, that lady. The one with the white jacket. What about her?" Margot considered this for a moment with the gravity she brought to most things. "She was looking at you for a long time when you weren't looking," she said, like she was trying to figure something out. Avery set down the broom. "People do that sometimes," he said, "when they first come in here and don't know what to expect. What are they trying to figure out?" He thought about how to answer that. He thought about the years of it. The slight surprise on people's faces when the diagnostic read correctly, when the estimate came in fair, when the work turned out to be what he'd said it would be, done in the time he'd said it would take. The recalibration. The way some people carried in assumptions, the way they carried in everything else, without noticing the weight. "Whether what they see is what they're actually getting," he said. Margot looked at him with that flat, direct gaze. "But it always is," she said, the way she said obvious things with a kind of patient exhaustion for a world that kept missing the point. "Yeah," he said. "It always is." He picked up the broom again. Outside, the sign above the door, Decker Electric, Est, 1987, caught the last angle of afternoon light, and for a moment, glowed the color of something worth reading. Margot went back to her homework. Her pencil moved across the paper in slow, careful strokes, and beside her long division the Beetle waited, labeled, and specific and exactly what it was.